Hi, my name is Yurii. I'm the creator of this channel. If you love exploring history, make sure you like and subscribe. It really motivates me to create more content for you. Let's dive in.
The assassination of Julius Caesar, March 15, 44 BC. The early morning chill of March 15, 44 BC still clung to the marble of the Curia of Pompey. Inside, the air began to thicken with the nervous anticipation of 60 senators. Each man, cloaked in the white folds of his toga, carried a hidden weight, a small, sharp dagger tucked away, a secret promise of violence. Marcus Junius Brutus, his face pale in the dim light, felt the cold metal of his blade against his side. He had spent the night wrestling with his conscience, the heavy responsibility of Rome's fate now resting on his shoulders. Gaius Cassius Longinus, his brother-in-law, watched him across the vast Senate floor, a slight, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. They were the architects of this desperate day, convinced that only Caesar's death could halt his ascent to absolute power. But the fragile unity of the 60 conspirators, a web of fear and conviction, could unravel at any moment. Caesar, oblivious to the web tightening around him, had dismissed the strange omens of the preceding days. 3 days before the Ides, a soothsayer named Spurinna had warned Caesar to beware. Caesar had laughed, his booming voice echoing through the forum, and replied, "The Ides of March have come." Spurinna had answered, his eyes fixed on Caesar's, "Yes, but they have not yet gone." Even his wife, Calpurnia, had woken in terror that very dawn, recounting vivid nightmares of his collapse within the very Senate house. She begged him to stay home. Yet Caesar, a man of unyielding resolve, stood ready to attend the session. What he didn't know was that some warnings, once given, had already sealed his fate. He wore his purple-bordered toga, a symbol of his dictatorial office, as he prepared to leave his residence. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, a trusted friend and former general, stood at Caesar's side, urging him not to delay. Decimus had been instrumental in guiding Caesar to the Senate that morning, ensuring his presence despite Calpurnia's pleas. Caesar, leaning on Decimus's counsel, had left his home, convinced of his own security. He strode through the bustling streets, past the early morning vendors and citizens, heading directly for the Curia, unaware of the specific fate that awaited him within those walls. As he navigated the throng, a Greek teacher named Artemidorus of Cnidos, having learned of the plot, pushes through the crowd. He presses a small, rolled scroll into Caesar's hand, urging him to read it immediately, for it contains a warning about the conspirators. Caesar, accustomed to petitions, holds the scroll casually, intending to read it later. He carries it, unread, into the Curia, a document listing all his betrayers, sealed by his own indifference. The bronze doors of the Senate loomed, a threshold not just to a building, but to a violent, irreversible turning point in Rome's history. Inside the Curia, the conspirators maintained a tense silence. They watched the entrance, every muscle taut. Lucius Tillius Cimber, his heart pounding against his ribs, positioned himself near Caesar's designated seat. As Caesar entered, his familiar stride commanding attention, Cimber stepped forward. He bowed low, a deferential posture, and presented a feigned petition, begging for his exiled brother's return. Caesar, accustomed to such appeals, waved him off with an impatient gesture. But Cimber persisted, his voice hushed but firm. He pressed closer then, with a sudden decisive movement, grasped the folds of Caesar's toga, pulling it down from his neck. This was the signal. But what would happen next would shatter the fragile peace of Rome forever. Publius Servilius Casca, positioned directly behind Caesar, felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. His hand, gripping the hilt of his dagger, trembled visibly. For a fraction of a second he hesitated, the enormity of the act paralyzing him. Then, with a desperate, nervous thrust, he plunged his blade into Caesar's shoulder or neck. Caesar cried out, a sharp, surprised sound, a mix of pain and disbelief. He struggled, twisting away, turning to face his attacker, his eyes wide with sudden horror. He grabbed Casca's arm, his grip still strong. But the first blow had been struck, and the dam had broken. The Curia erupted. Other conspirators surged forward, a blur of white togas and glinting steel. Gaius Cassius Longinus, Seeing Caesar's struggle move swiftly, his own blade flashed, arcing down to strike Caesar directly in the face. A brutal, personal blow. The air filled with shouts and the sickening thud of daggers finding their mark. Senators who were not part of the 60 conspirators recoiled in horror, some scrambling under benches, others frozen in disbelief. The carefully planned attack had devolved into a frenzied scrum around Caesar. Yet, the most significant blow was still to come, from the hand of the one he least suspected. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, the very man who had convinced Caesar to attend, now drew his own weapon. His face grim, he plunged his dagger into Caesar's thigh, adding to the growing multitude of wounds. Caesar, bleeding profusely, his purple-bordered toga now rapidly soaking crimson, stumbled back, overwhelmed by the sheer number of assailants. Each conspirator felt a desperate need to strike, to commit to the act, ensuring no one could later claim innocence or shift blame. The metallic scent of fresh blood began to fill the usually dignified hall, a stark contrast to the scent of polished marble and old parchment. The relentless rain of daggers continued, a blur of motion and desperate grunts. But even with 22 wounds already inflicted, the most profound betrayal was yet to land. Caesar, weakened and disoriented, swayed on his feet. His eyes, now clouded with pain and betrayal, scanned the faces around him. Marcus Junius Brutus, the most prominent figure among the conspirators, stepped forward through the chaos. He raised his dagger high. Caesar, his vision blurring, saw the face of the man he had once called son, the man he had pardoned after Pompey's defeat, the man he had promoted to high office. With a final, desperate gasp, a sound that seemed to be a question more than a cry, Brutus plunged his blade into Caesar's groin. The blow was significant, a deep cut among the many. Caesar, having sustained 23 stab wounds, his body failing, could no longer stand. He collapsed, not in dignity, but in a crumpled heap, at the base of Pompey's towering statue, its cold marble gaze fixed upon his dying moments. A stunned, awful silence fell over the Curia, broken only by the ragged breathing of the conspirators and the drip of Caesar's blood onto the marble floor. Then panic erupted anew. The remaining senators, those not part of the 60 assassins, scrambled in terror, tripping over the heavy oak benches, fleeing the Curia in a desperate rush for the exits. Marcus Brutus, still holding his bloody dagger, attempted to address the assembly to declare that Rome was now free. He raised his voice, shouting words of liberty, but his pronouncements were drowned out by the shrieks and cries of the fleeing men, their fear far outweighing any promise of freedom. Outside, the conspirators, their daggers still drawn and gleaming with Caesar's blood, marched through the streets of Rome. They shouted declarations of liberty, their voices echoing through the forum, hoping to rally the populace to their cause. They believed they had saved the Republic, that the citizens would greet them as heroes. But the crowds, instead of cheering, watched in stunned, terrified silence. The air was thick, not with celebration, but with an ominous tension. The freedom they proclaimed was met not with welcome, but with a chilling, profound uncertainty. The conspirators, marched through Rome, intended to usher in a new era of Republican freedom, instead ignited a powder keg. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, quickly took control of Caesar's bloodied body. With a powerful, impassioned eulogy delivered from the rostra in the Forum, he skillfully turned public opinion against the assassins, painting them as murderers, not liberators. Within weeks, the city simmered with unrest, a dangerous prelude to widespread violence. The assassination, meant to save the Republic from tyranny, instead plunged Rome into a series of brutal civil wars that would rage for 13 years, tearing apart the very fabric of Roman society. The vision of the 60 senators, their desperate hope for a restored republic, crumbled into dust, swept away by the tide of vengeance and ambition. Caesar had planned to depart for the Parthian campaign within 3 days of the Ides. Had he survived, he would have left Rome and possibly never returned alive. His grandnephew Octavian was already named heir in his will, meaning the transition to autocracy was already in motion regardless of the assassination. The Republic's institutions had been failing for 50 years before Caesar. The question is not whether Rome would have become an empire, but who would have been its first emperor.